Theme song. Welcome back to Solid Content and welcome back to New City. I'm going to zoom out here and show you the map that I'm working with today. What is this over here? It's like just a little water hole. This will be fine. I'll build a community around this later on. We are playing New City again. I did have an episode out a long time ago, but I had to take it down because there was like a little stutter going on. It might still be there a little bit. It's looking a lot better, and I've learned a lot since I was playing it, so I kind of wanted to dive into a new city. So we got a fresh new landscape here, and I'm thinking I'm going to kind of model it more, now that I know ahead into the game a little bit what's coming up. I'm going to model it more after kind of my hometown, right? So I'm going to have like a downtown kind of here with some sort of like wide boulevards or berths for some highways to come in later on. So I'm going to kind of try to future-proof my downtown core a little bit. And then I want to have those roads kind of come out here, a lot of freeway access. But then off of those major roads, I'm going to have little community, like little chunks of communities built up here and there. And I want to see if that shows up in the community heat map. Like if that actually works to generate little mini communities all over the place. And then they all kind of feed into the big bad downtown that's going to be right here. So that's going to look pretty good, but while I'm doing that, I thought it would be a lot of fun to get going with an interview. I was able to get hold of Super Soup and Lone Pine himself. So 2 of the 3-person team that created this wonderful, amazing game. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy that interview while I get started with this new city here. I'm thinking like, I got to start placing, I'm going to do some, I think I'm playing it on medium. We got 20 million to start with, so that's quite a sizable chunk of change. So maybe I'm going to lay down some like road shapes around here, kind of get like what I want my downtown to be, and then kind of where am I putting my farms, etc. Oh, I could have a road, like a little switchback, go through the mountains, and then have all this farmland over here. I mean, I'm going to do that. Oh, I'm kidding. I'm getting distracted. And I want you to enjoy this interview that I have with the creators of the game ahead of the new content update. So there's a bunch of new content coming out very shortly. Get ready to have more information about the game. Get ready to have more stuff to play with. And building designing and all kinds of stuff. I noticed in the menu here, we got the building designer up and running. So a lot going on in New City, a lot to look forward to, and I hope you enjoy this interview. We talk about some tips towards the end of the video. We're going to talk about some gameplay tips. We're going to talk about some of the things that kind of got this game going, including the role that Lone Pine's father played in getting us going in this game. So thank you to Lone Pine's father for giving Lone Pine the push he needed. And we're going to learn a couple of other stories as well. So, like I said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the interview while we build a brand new city, St. Contensburg. Let's get at it. Thank you so much for joining me, Super Soup and Lone Pine. Now, the game is published by Lone Pine. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Lone Pine, you are the originator of the game.
That I am.
Okay. And Super Soup, you just like recently joined? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, so I joined the team in October of 2019.
Oh, yeah.
At first as a community manager, just under a contract. But I ended up becoming the company's first salaried employee.
Oh, wow.
And I transitioned into development, design. So I write code that goes into the game, bug fixing, QA. And I'm also going to be writing a lot of the creative writing stuff. We've got a newspaper coming out. We've got a Citipedia, and I'm going to be putting a lot of words in there.
Okay. All right. So then I'll go back to Lone Pine, and then maybe I think we should rewind and just like start at the start. Can you tell me? So, I mean, but that is good to know. That's good to know, Super Soup. But that's just making me realize like, oh, we got to start at the beginning here. Lone Pine. Tell me about starting this game and maybe why. Like, I'm sure you've played City Builders, so you're like, I need to make it better. I need to make something different.
Yeah, so the origin of the game actually isn't exactly a city builder. The company that made City Skylines, before they made City Skylines, they made a game called Cities in Motion, and they made a second one called Cities in Motion 2.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and it was like a mass transit simulation game. So the mass transit part got a little tedious after a while, so that's kind of when I got bored of the game. I started kind of playing the map editor. Like, I figured out that it was kind of fun to build the highway system, and they had like a traffic simulation. So I would, go into the map editor, build out the highway system, and then load up the game in the simulation and see how the highway system, performed in terms of traffic. So I turned the traffic slider all the way to the right and, just tried to see if I could make like a highway system that would support that amount of traffic.
You were doing like a meta game, like playing, like turning the game into your own game.
Right. It was like an alternate game mode, and there wasn't like any score or win condition. Like the game didn't give me any information about like, your traffic is this good or whatever.
Right.
And, I had to keep on switching between the map editor and the game mode. You could build highways in the game mode, but it would cause this traffic simulation to totally glitch out.
Oh, okay.
It was clearly just not the focus of the game.
Right.
The only reason why you would do that is so that your buses would have another way to go. So you'd build like a highway just for the buses. So I said, well, I want this to be a real game. So I started building it out, and I just built a traffic simulator. And it's kind of funny because I'm still not satisfied with the traffic simulation. I do think that our traffic simulation is better than Cities in Motion 2. Not to bash it or anything.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
Yeah, but like I'm continuing to work on it, and I just always want it to be better. So at a certain point, I had like the traffic simulation, but the vehicles just kind of spawned, and I needed like a more structured reason for the vehicles to spawn, and I also needed like buildings and decoration and stuff like that. So I started to build out that system, and I built the building designer, which is a pretty sophisticated part of the game now, just so that I could design some buildings. And then I ended up making a whole agent simulation, which there's like a desire to like build like a agent-based economic simulation that maybe I should have resisted in retrospect, but like now we're kind of committed, and it's a cool
We're in deep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a cool system.
Yeah, can you quickly explain to the people, like obviously I know everything there is to know about coding and game creation and all sorts of things, but just for those people that might not, what is the agent system?
Well, so the game has the computer has a representation of each individual person in the city.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And this is something that we do different than other city builders. I think most city builders, at least most modern city builders, they do have like an agent-based simulation, but they only have a few thousand agents in a big city.
So because like does City Skylines do that a little bit? Like you can kind of follow them like little individuals from their homes to their offices or something, but they must have to cap it at some point.
I think so. I don't know if you can follow them like into their houses, so they might disappear once they get into their house.
Yeah,
and then
that's true.
The game might like generate them when they go somewhere else.
Yeah.
In our system, all the people are persistent.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they have a job. They have families. They have like a relationship with other people in their household.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
They'll go visit friends.
So when they go,
yeah, the friends are kind of random. So it's kind of there's like a friend activity, and it just
like real life.
Yeah, another person to for them to hang out with.
That's amazing. So they have so it generates sort of like a connections thing. Does that go into, because one thing that I noticed that I really like about NewCity is there's like that, I don't know what you call it, but the sense of community radar or something. There's like a scanner level that I flick on and you're like, oh, this area is like thick with community building. Like these folks here just love each other.
Yeah, we call those heat maps. So we have a community heat map.
Maps, right?
Yeah, certain zones, so like the farm zone, agricultural zone, and a residential zone, and particularly the mixed use zone, have a benefit to community. Certain buildings, like schools and hospitals and whatnot, have a benefit to community. And then certain zones are kind of difficult for there to be community, like office zones and retail zones.
Right. So I think something I was doing with my city is trying to build like lots of strips of mixed use. And then I was also noticing like, oh, they aren't actually building here yet until I got to a certain size. And then I was like, oh, I guess I think that's what I love about the game so far is like, it's brand new. Whereas City Skylines, I'm like, I know all the things I'm going to hit. At this number, I'm going to hit this. At this number, I'm going to hit this. So I'm diving into this game now, and I'm like, oh, that's what makes them move into this area. Okay, like I know what the next step is now. This is great. When you started designing it, it just seems like, to me, and again, because I'm not a coder, it just seems entirely overwhelming. So when you started it, did you start with the traffic simulation? And then what was the next thing you added? You were like, okay, we got the traffic sim down. We need a reason for them, so let's add houses. Or like what were the structures you added?
Well, yeah, that was the order. I started with the traffic simulation. The traffic simulation was, always kind of my primary focus. And then I added in the buildings. Once I had kind of the agent-based simulation, I was like, well, this is really more of a city builder than a transportation simulator. So, I figured I'd commit to it being a city builder. And then I added in the heat maps and the amenities, which have an influence on the heat maps. So, like, the first heat map that I did was pollution. We kind of kept building. I like to say that I built it up triangle by triangle. If you don't know graphics programming, 3D graphics, it's actually all triangles.
Right.
So if you look at any kind of 3D game, 2D games are different, but any kind of 3D game, unless it's something crazy like it's ray tracing or something like that, then it's going to be broken down into triangles. And anything that's like a square, that's two triangles put together.
Okay.
And so, I started just like, with the triangle instructions saying, render this triangle, render that triangle. And like the roads were just, two triangles because they're rectangular, and, built it up from there.
It sounds very clear. It sounds like you guys were almost going organically, almost as if a city itself. Like you're like, well, let's get the roads down. We're going to see what pollution is generated, how that interacts with the environment. And so you just kind of went, if I'm not mistaken, you kind of went like heat map by heat map. Like, let's add this layer of complexity in.
Mm-hmm. And that's, in order to do a big project, you really need to think about a minimum viable product.
Right.
Meaning, what's the simplest thing that is, close to what I'm envisioning? And you build that first, and then you build in more and more complexity.
When did you hit that moment of viability to you? Like when were you kind of like, you sat back, you looked at a render of the game or whatever, and you're like, here we go, this is it, I've got a game now? It
was kind of an encouragement from my dad.
Oh.
So, I was working on the game, just kind of as a hobby. It was really a hobby. And this has been a hobby for me, since I was a teenager. I've made a lot of different games, none as viable as this one. I was also looking for kind of like an office job, but I wasn't finding the kind of office job that I wanted. Particularly, a lot of software development companies now, they have these open floor plan offices, and I can't really work in that kind of environment. I really need a cubicle or like a space to myself. My dad was sitting with me, and I was showing him, what I was doing, and he made some kind of comment that was like, I'm beginning to feel like you're just never going to, take the plunge, and which, that kind of got to me. And so, after he went to bed, I went to the Steam website and I paid the $100 fee to sign up to release a game.
No way.
Yeah.
I'll show you.
Yeah, and
yeah,
and
exactly.
It has like a rule that there has to be like 30 days or something like that. So I set a schedule for myself for like 6 weeks. So like I'm gonna release in 6 weeks. That would have been the end of May 2019.
Wow.
So I announced it, I tried to get some interest. I didn't get a lot of attention at first. And, based on early testing, I realized that rather than releasing it then, it was kind of unfinished, but it had a lot of potential. It would be better to, hold back,
right,
and make it really good.
Well, but a big thanks to your dad then for getting that ball rolling, right? Like you took that plunge, now you have deadlines. And I feel like deadlines are the unsung heroes of creative endeavors. Because everybody thinks like, no, I'll release it when it's perfect. And I think every creative, any type of creative you are, you're like, I won't release it till it's perfect. And so deadlines come along and just force you to like, sometimes you crap something out and sometimes you actually get like, a fraction of the way to what you thought it was going to be in your head. And I do think like the indie game world is going in a really cool place where there's patience. If there's a heart of a game that people are playing and there's a good player base, there is patience for those updates. It's like, we'll see what you guys can do with it.
And my attitude about deadlines is I never see deadlines actually get met.
Yeah.
And if they are met, then it's always an unfinished product.
Yeah.
So like it's like we met the deadline, but it's like, well, you didn't really.
But at what cost?
Yeah, at what cost? Exactly. But like having the deadline does make it happen.
Yes.
So it's kind of, I don't know, it's funny because the deadlines aren't honored, but they're like so valuable.
Yeah.
I've heard it said that games are never done. You're just done working on them.
Yeah, I've heard that quote. That's such a great quote.
You gotta just get it out there and we'll patch it.
Hey, Super Soup, maybe we should throw to you now. So, because you were both discussing off the top before we started recording here that there's going to be some more things coming up, some different directions you're going with. In some of my other indie like interviews, indie views, maybe that's what I should call them.
Indie views. I like
indie views. They were just talking about how they were kind of taking their direction from the player base a little bit, like seeing what people enjoyed and then kind of building off of that. They have a series of things they want to do, but they're like, oh, the players really want more drama in the game. Okay, so then we're going to do this update first. Are you guys approaching it differently, Super Soup, or are you... or is that similar? Are you kind of seeing what the players want? And if that is the case, tell me, what do the players want out of this game so far?
So we're very engaged with our community, whether that's on Discord. We have a Discord channel called Feature Suggestions, where people can just drop in and say what they want to see.
Okay.
And then, of course, I browse and moderate the Steam discussion board. So I read them all. And there's some suggestions that are just what we would call out of scope, where it's like that's too big of a feature or that's not quite. At the end of the day, Lone Pine and I have to decide what's this game going to be. Ultimately, what features simply don't fit with our vision and fit with the sandbox we're looking to create. But every once in a while, we'll have our own ideas, and then someone will suggest, hey, it'd be great if we had, say, airports or seaports. And we go, hey, that's great you think that, because we were already thinking that.
Yes.
And then that definitely bumps it up on our priority list. Some of these features, it's like to get to, say, airports, we need to have a system for modular amenities. Amenities are what we call the school or the university or whatnot. So the university is a modular amenity in that you build the quad, then you build the dorms, then you choose what schools go in. So in order to get to some of these what I would call midterm or long-term features, we've got to build some features up as a foundation to allow those other features to occur. For instance, the newspaper and the Citypedia, which we're working on right now, those features required a lot of back-end work to allow them to take shape.
Right.
We needed to add ways to basically, we integrated a markdown library so that me or Lone Pine going in and writing articles, we can say, reach out to variables that are in the game so that the data in the Citypedia will be accurate if someone has a mod pack that modifies the growth rate of businesses or whatnot. So, when we're writing the article, we'll say, oh, yes, your business growth rate is, and then we just write in the variable name, and then Markdown will automatically parse that over. It goes to find it.
Right.
So little things like that, that people won't see. They'll just see the finished product. But it was a bunch of steps along the way to get there. And in some cases, some of those steps were informed by player desires and feedback.
That's awesome. Do you have an example of a suggestion or like something that somebody wanted to have that was out of scope, easily out of scope, but one that you're like, I mean, that would be cool.
Here's one from 2 days ago. I'm going to call out a user on our Discord. I love you, buddy. But it does say the ability to control the nearby cities that we see in game. One of the features we have is neighboring cities.
Yeah.
So as your city develops, these neighboring cities kind of adapt to fill the needs your city has. So if you have a lot of open job positions and maybe not a lot of people to fill it, you'll see residential start growing up in these neighboring cities. And if you have a lot of people but not a lot of jobs, you'll see industry, etc. That's frankly going to be out of scope simply because to allow you to go from your city to then take over a nearby city, those nearby cities don't have any like terrain generated for them. They're more of an abstraction.
Yeah.
They're just a bullet point on the map. So yeah, sorry, probably not going to happen. Great idea though. I love because he's thinking like SimCity 4, which is one of my favorite city builders, where you had the whole region map and you would go in and say, well, I'm going to work on this city now I'm going to work on this city, and then you could connect them and go back and forth. We definitely leaned into the region map in terms of scale. Like our largest map is definitely a region map. You can have multiple city centers, but to allow you to control cities out even further beyond the border of the map, no.
Yeah. That seems like quite a lot. And that kind of what you were saying made me think about like limitations in game design. So for example, with Space Haven, right, they were like, well, we can't have a second floor. You can't have multi-floored spaceships because it's just going to add on a layer of complexity, and like the gameplay will actually grind to a halt. Like you won't enjoy yourself because you'll be like, I don't know, maybe I've got a fire on floor 16. Like I'm never going to find it. So too do I think. I think you said SimCity 4, one of your favorite city builders of all time. I definitely agree. I'm thinking that we might be on the same page, that SimCity 5 kind of like missed a few marks. I'm seeing some head shakes. Yeah. So maybe both of you, Super Soup, go first here, but maybe you could talk about kind of like what are you seeing in modern city builders? I know already Lone Pine was talking about
Cities in Motion.
Cities in Motion. Yeah, sorry. So I know you've played that one, but what is kind of lacking and what are you hoping to add with your game? So I know, and maybe you could start with SimCity 5. Like what I think the limitations there seem to be like they had so much packed in to their like design work and like the look of the city that the city, you know, the maps couldn't be much larger than like 2 city blocks or something.
Right.
So that was how they dealt with their limitations. They were like, we'll just limit the player. I know what we'll do. We'll limit the player, and then we'll bleed them for DLC money. But like, so yeah. What do you think? What do you think? Maybe even with City Skylines being a more successful city builder, like, what do you think? NewCity is trying to fit in. What's NewCity trying to add to the genre?
Well, first, I'd like to say that I know for a fact a lot of very talented and very eager, for lack of a better word, developers worked on like SimCity 5.
You know what? That's a good call. That's a good call. That's going to get me in trouble. My ripping on another game just for fun is going to get me in a lot of trouble.
No, and that's fine. You know, and we can rip on the end product all day long, but I know there's people just like me and Lone Pine who went in, they love what they do, and they did the best they could. Yeah. And I have no doubt that it was, you know, we'll talk about guys in business suits who don't make games and probably don't play the games are the reasons.
Yeah, let's go there. I like that.
Yeah. So, but the fact of the matter is, you're right. One thing I've discovered in my study of game design is that games are defined by their limitations more so than what they allow you to do.
Whoa, okay.
You know, and that really shapes the structure of the gameplay loops, and you know, it's about building that sandbox and the tools you give the players to interact with it. But you literally can't just do everything. Right. But you can take that to the opposite extreme, which is, you know, bumping up against the walls of the sandbox, as they probably did in SimCity 5. They really wanted a robust agent simulation, I know. You know, they wanted to be the next-gen city builder, but they ended up discovering that, you know, as we're discovering, routing is hard in a big city. And so I have no doubt that for budget reasons or in a boardroom meeting, the guys in suits were going, hey, I see you're dealing with all these performance issues. You know, we can't launch the game like this. What would it take to fix it? And what would it take to fix it maybe by next month? You know, like they gave them probably a super aggressive timetable. And so they went, well, great, we're just going to have to squeeze the city down into, you know, a couple square blocks, and that's all you get. I would say that's the opposite. That's a limitation not so much to help shape it, but it's like if you were trying to pull a statue out of marble, but then you're like, well, I'm not getting the arms right, so we're going to cut the arms off. Oh, and we're going to cut the legs off, and then you've got just like a torso, you know.
And are you suggesting that was like perhaps some folks that were wearing really nice suits probably made that call, you think?
I would, again, far be it from me to speak to things I don't understand, but I would propose, based on my understanding, that's likely.
Let me suggest my theory, actually.
I want to hear this.
Yes.
Yeah, talking about SimCity 5 specifically. You talk about the guys in suits, and one of the decisions that the guys in suits made was that we have to have some sort of DRM. Now, DRM for a single-player game is difficult because people don't accept this idea that I need to be always online to play a single-player game.
For sure.
So they made it multiplayer to provide that excuse to add the DRM.
Oh.
The city builder is probably the most difficult genre to make multiplayer.
Right.
100% agree.
I think that there was one game that got the multiplayer right, which is SimCity 2000 Network Edition. But every other city builder game, to my knowledge, has gotten multiplayer completely wrong.
I mean, Skylines just is like, nope. They're just like, we're not doing this. It's a single player game. Don't worry about it.
That's our attitude too. Because they made it multiplayer, the way that they made it multiplayer was essentially if someone stopped playing their city, you could go in and take it over. And the problem with that was that every city needed to be playable on the minimum spec machine.
Oh, scalability.
That's what constrained the performance. And that's what constrained the map size.
Oh, I never thought about that. Talking to actual game makers has made me feel a little bad for my playful jab at SimCity 5. And I do want to say, just for like the people that listen to my channel, as a quick apology, I did obsess over that game. I still played the crap out of it. I just played the crap out of it for a shorter time than I would have wanted to. Whereas SimCity 4 was like most of my university days.
Right.
And then City Skylines is just like, I don't know, every other day I'm like, oh, just 10 minutes. Like, I'll just go back in there. I just keep going back to it. And I do feel that like NewCity is headed that way for me. I gotta fix my computer so I can play it properly. But I was very much enjoying what's been going on with NewCity. And you said recently there was an architecture update to this game. So first of all, to conclude that last thought, that's great that you're sticking with the single player, because what it sounds like from what you're both saying is that means you can focus on that experience, the solid single player experience of building a city. You don't need to worry about the limitations of making it sort of like, bomb proof across a number of systems.
Right. Yeah, and multiplayer really complicates a performance-sensitive game.
Yeah.
A game that's where the performance doesn't matter, or the performance is really about graphics, like a first-person shooter. A minimum spec machine, you can just turn the graphics down.
Right.
The gameplay is still the same, like the bullet physics and whatnot. It's not that complicated.
Ray tracing's pretty cheap. Or casting a ray into the environment.
Yeah.
Cheap as in cheap on your system. Doesn't cost a lot of...
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's cheap because you're only firing one bullet at a time. So like if you think about like a screen, it's 1920 by 1080. You multiply those two together, you get something like 2 million. So that's like, imagine like 2 million bullets, one for every pixel.
Right.
Every frame. 60 frames a second.
Taxing on the computer. Okay, but what I wanted to move into were features in this game. So like the architecture update was recently, correct?
Right.
Yes.
And so these are new layers that you're adding to the game as things progress into people playing the game. What does this add to it? And then, and what are you hoping to build out with this feature?
Yeah, so the architect update was primarily focused on the building designer. The primary feature was the ability to add a custom moddable building decoration, which is an object that you can import from like Blender or 3D modeling software into the game. So you can have a tree that's any shape, or like a building part that's any shape. We primarily needed this feature for our artist, so that he can, make the buildings look as nice as possible. And he's been doing an amazing job.
Yeah. Hats off to Gynos.
Yes.
Just call him out.
Hey, thanks for those really nice university buildings, Gynos. I've been enjoying building my university campus because of that.
Oh man, yeah.
We're trying to make the game moddable. And what that means is that everything that we do, like the way that we get art and content into the game, we just use PNG files and OBJ files. We don't use like some sort of arcane archive format like other games do, and that just makes it easy to mod.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to, like, that's what another thing I love about indie games is, like, friendliness towards modders, because we recognize that it's like that is a way that communities show love for a game, is they just start tinkering around inside the like the train set that you've created.
It's free content for us.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point too.
We're never going to be able to provide like a mod for like every country, or like every historical era. It'd be nice to, but we're not going to be able to do that. But like, someone else can easily just make buildings that look like, another country, or vehicles that look like horse and buggy or something like that.
So you were saying that all of the designs, or in a 3D game, it's all sort of polygon based, or rather triangles. Is there an issue there with, like, how do you square having mods create whatever they want and maybe like that making buildings that are just like too quote unquote expensive? Just like, I've modded a park that's 30 million trees. You know what I mean? Like, is there an upper limit in the architecture tool that's like, hey pal, like pump the brakes, dude?
We don't impose a limit, but I think we kind of expect modders to be aware that if they do import their 30 million polygon tree, only with an incredibly high-end machine, and probably nobody, because we are dealing with performance issues, which is something that we're really focused on actually.
We probably should impose a limit, but it's sort of with great power comes great responsibility. You can do whatever you want. You could break the game to pieces.
I guess that's kind of my philosophy. Is I don't like to impose hard limits. There are some places where I impose limits. So there's a cap to the number of vehicles that can exist at once. You can set that cap higher if you want to.
Oh, okay. So you create limits that make the game enjoyable through and through, and then if a player knows what they're doing, or they know their machine can handle it, then they can dial it up into those other levels of fun. Like what you were doing in Cities in Motion, I guess, right? Like dialing that slider of traffic and just like messing up those roads with traffic to see what would happen.
Yep.
I love it. So they could make... Because, I almost called your game not a city designer, but like a region designer. The scale is just so much bigger than any city game I've ever played.
Right, and we're using the slogan, the regional city builder.
There, yeah, right. Yeah, you're building a city. What I love about the scale, too, is I grew up in a prairie town, surrounded by not very many natural impediments to growth. So things would grow out very wide. And then you're like, man, this city is massive. And you look at it and you're like, yeah, there's only like 30,000 people in this town. But it looks massive. And so it was like, that's the only time, like with City Skylines, you're like getting your first skyscrapers at 5,000 people or something. And then in this game, it's like, oh, these feel like, the one I'm making happens to be very prairie, just like surrounded by farmland and stuff. But that's, it looks like one of those towns. It looks like a town I grew up in.
And that was an original frustration with me.
Oh, really?
With other city builders. So like when I go on a plane, I always get the window seat because I love looking at cities and landscapes. I definitely notice when I play city builders that it's like, okay, so I have this like 5 city blocks that are like apartment towers and skyscrapers, and then I have maybe 5 city blocks that look kind of suburban, but it's not like a legitimate suburb, it's just like a tiny thing. And then I have empty space. It's like, no, there's layers. There's like farmland, and then there's sprawling suburbs, and then there's kind of the medium city, and then there's the tall skyscrapers.
Yeah, I love that. And if your government isn't like centrally controlling of everything, there is a more natural layering to things where it's like, yeah, you wouldn't have just like a tower in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And it's we're both Americans, and so there is kind of an American aspect to American cities do sprawl more than cities in other continents.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah.
And we want to we're planning to have other countries planning to do England, Japan, and Brazil.
Cool.
And when we get there, we might change the mechanics a little bit so that you do get more density, like a European or Japanese city. But I think that we'll also
Very
I
cool.
think there'll still be sprawl because,
Yeah.
like, I mean, if you look at, like, you know, Google Maps, like, European and Japanese cities, they do sprawl, like they're huge
Yeah.
places.
I mean, I think Tokyo itself is coming close to the population of my entire country. Like, that is and it sprawls, but it is insanely dense. Why don't we
Tokyo's
dive
nuts.
into that real quick? So let's take Brazil, for example. What would be the challenges? What would you want to tweak, do you think? I mean, you don't, unless you don't already have a plan. It could be off the top of your head.
We don't. So I don't. To be honest, I don't know a lot about Brazil. Like, I've never been there. Our
Mhm.
artist is Brazilian, so
Mhm.
we're hoping that he can provide, you know, some cultural knowledge. I think I'm pretty familiar with England and Japan from media. You know, I haven't been there. I'm not like a cultural expert, but, like, you
Yeah.
know, watch English TV shows, Japanese TV shows, anime, whatnot. I think that England and Japan, they drive on the left, so we're going to make sure to implement that.
So there's that.
Yeah, which is very technically complicated.
Really?
You know?
Okay.
But it is something that we'll have to account for.
Yeah. It's not so much a switch we flip. It's going to be a process to get our cars on the other side of the road.
And then plus, I assume we're going to get some roundabout action, maybe?
Hopefully.
Yeah, you can already sort of do roundabouts.
Yeah, that's
But,
true.
you don't-
isn't it?
You don't know this, Lone Pine. I took a Japanese culture and civilization class in college.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, there you
So
go.
you got your, you know, I can offer a perspective perhaps.
Yeah. So why don't you riff on that, Mitch? What do you think would be different in terms of, like, a gameplay challenge, not like aesthetic, or language, you know, issues, but what would be different about playing in Japan or England or Brazil?
In Japan, people either walk or it's mass transit. Not a lot of
Oh.
people own cars. Like there are cars, and you know, but like their emphasis is on mass transit or walking. So I think we already plan to build out our pedestrian system, but making sure that's really robust, and then mass transit. You know, making sure that I know we've been having some challenges with, say the bus stacking up on each other. We'll want to make sure we've got subways. We'll want to make sure we've got you know, good commuter train setups, and then
We have big plans for mass transit. It's
right.
kind of a late addition because for a long time it was just cars.
Right.
And we got mass transit earlier this year. It's kind of simple right now, but we have big plans.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So maybe. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. The last thing I was gonna say is that you know, Japan, the Japanese people, they're very kind of insular, and so we might want to emphasize our community heat map and maybe give it some more impacts in, say, a Japanese city in terms of, you know, building those parks and kind of heritage sites.
Right. Okay. So more emphasis on, like, sort of creating smaller communities or like pockets of.
Really, yeah, really dense communities, and then because our heat maps are balanced in such a way that certain heat maps have effect on other heat maps. So pollution negatively affects health naturally.
Yep.
Where health suffers, prosperity suffers, and you'll see, you know, higher crime and whatnot. And so, you know, getting that tuning right has been a ballet, for lack of a better word. And
That's a great word.
yeah,
I think that's the
and
best way to put it.
it's a dance. And
Yeah.
so we'll you know, as we go into these different cultures and these different, you know, world city styles, we will definitely probably retune the variables going into our sandbox, the heat maps and their effect on things, to better reflect that culture.
That's fascinating. It's something that I hadn't thought about, but of course you'd have to have those kinds of considerations going into a different type of. Sure, okay, you want a different aesthetic, but to earn that aesthetic, to make those densities work, you need a different gameplay, like a different play style, and now that needs underlying mechanical fixes. Oh my god, all the knock-on effects of a seemingly slight change.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, so the way that we get the kind of sprawling cities with the dense city center, the density heat map is tuned to facilitate that.
Right.
So for a culture that is more naturally dense than American culture, like European or Japanese, we'll probably tune the density heat map differently. So you'll get more density sooner. Or maybe like
Right.
you'll get more density sooner, but then like getting the peak density is harder.
Right.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. So then that'll create sort of like core downtowns, even within a dense map. You'd still have a piece that has reached peak. And then,
Yep.
okay, I get that.
Density would look like a bell curve. You know?
I love that. I've got a couple of things left that I want to go to kind of like ask you guys about. But before we get to like the stuff that's upcoming or your future plans for the game, I thought it'd be kind of fun to take a step back one last time, and talk about challenges, like specific ones. Do either of you or both of you have a story or a moment of a real challenging to implement thing? Because it sounds very systematic. You like employ this heat map, make sure it works, make sure it affects the gameplay, move on to another layer. You're adding layers. Was there a point at which the structure started to feel more like a House of Cards, where you're like, oh no, crap, it's all breaking apart? What were some of like the biggest challenges to even making this thing run?
You want to go first, Lopine?
I kind of want you to go first, actually.
Okay. It is a never-ending story
Of
challenges, you know. And one we're dealing with right now is we want to add some more modular amenities. So things like, if you were to build it, say, and players are going to freak out when I say this. If you were to build, say, a power plant, what would that look like? Yeah, Lone Pine's laughing because players want utilities, and being
something that I've been kind of against is utilities.
Oh,
and
really?
Utilities, I'm kind of against it, but like I'm kind of letting it happen, on a certain schedule.
Okay, sorry. Super Soup, before we keep going, like put a pin in what you were about to say, but like to me that's some breaking expose news here. We got to talk about why Lone Pine is anti-utilities.
Of course. No, yeah, let's
real quick Lone Pine, what's going on there?
I've explained this before. I think that the quintessential utility that explains why I think that they're bad is water. So water is a pretty boring mechanic, because basically you have to put water mains down everywhere where you have a road, or like every major road or something like that, and you just have to like cover like everything that's developed, and then you have to build a certain number of like pumping stations or water towers or treatment plants or whatever. The game doesn't usually provide like a big water pump, so like you end up with like 20 of them in a row, where you want to, like, you have one space this is just like your water space, like you're going to put your water industrial buildings. So you put like 20 of them in a row. It looks kind of ridiculous, and you're really trying to like fill that capacity.
So you're saying it lends the gameplay style to a more of like a min-max, like a silly build rather than a realistic build, because why wouldn't you just place 20 of them in a row? Like why would you try to go out of your way to like make a grid, like a spaced out water supply system? If you're trying to build a game, just put 30 of them.
I just think that it's a chore, it's not really that fun.
You know what? You kind of won me over a little bit, just because with City Skylines, like they have the interesting impact of like, oh, now you've got all this poo water going out into your rivers. Like, what do you do with it? And then the thing that you do with it is put it somewhere else or clean it up mostly, and then take it. Yeah, so you aren't really, it's not a dynamic problem that you're always working with. It's just like, oh, I just need to build 15 more water pumps. All right, done. Take out a loan, done.
Like in comparison to traffic, traffic is a problem that it kind of builds on itself. Like it keeps getting more and more complicated the more you try to manage. Like the bigger city that you have, the more complicated the traffic becomes. And like, expressways are more complicated than roads, and mass transit is more complicated than expressways.
Right.
The bigger city that you have, the more complexity you have to take on.
I've only just started learning that in my gameplay with NewCity. I'm like, oh, okay, how do I? One of the things I was going to ask you, so we're just going to go in. No, wait, sorry. Oh, I'm getting out of control here. We were in the middle of it. We were in the middle of Super Soup telling us something. So you place a power plant, and you were talking about a specific challenge that came with that.
Well, yeah, and this is more of a game design challenge. And so the like I was saying, games are defined more by their limitations than what they allow you to do.
Yeah.
As we've identified, this game grew organically.
Mhm.
And one of the things that was not, if you imagine building a house, you build the foundation, then you build the frame, then you put the drywall up, and the house kind of comes up in that way. This game at no point had utilities as a part of the game design. And so rather than being a foundational structural mechanic or component or gameplay loop for the players, at this point we're looking at utilities and going, it's going to be tacked on, and we don't want to do tacked on, because then it becomes, like Lone Pine was saying, a chore. It's just something you just have to do. And we're looking at, well, how are these utilities going to affect your cities? People have been building cities without utilities, so what happens if we launch that update and they load an old save? Are their cities just screwed? So we're trying to find ways where utilities are like a buff, to use an MMO term, like where they buff your cities as opposed to being a requirement.
Oh, interesting.
But then, then you get into,
and then if it's just a buff, in what sense is it not tacked on?
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And is playing with utilities easy mode and then not playing with utilities hard mode then? Because you're not getting those buffs.
And this comes back to the shape of the game. Games are shaped and defined by their limitations. So it's kind of like we've never had utilities. The game has been shaped by the lack of utilities. Are we adding utilities just because every other city builder has it? And then the question becomes, is there another mechanic that would better serve our core mechanics that could fill that role of something that you should be adding in as your city grows? So that's what we're evaluating. But that's, as you can see, it's not so straightforward. It's not just like, well, people want utilities. Let's throw in utilities. It's really been a lot of long conversations, and will continue to be, about the future.
That's a good point.
I think we can tease one thing related to utilities. So, we've talked about it. We've done design discussions and whatnot. And we've decided that the utilities that we want to implement, because we got to implement something that other people haven't done before, right?
Right.
So the utilities that we want to implement, we're going to do electricity. We're also going to do radio/television. We haven't decided if those are two distinct things yet.
Very cool.
And then we'll do telephone service.
Oh yeah.
Right. And eventually, maybe internet.
Yeah, maybe.
1990 and later.
Well, okay. So my thinking is, and to be clear, this is not a promise of a future game or anything.
You heard that here. No promises being made right now.
If we leave the possibility open for a sequel, which is not a promise, but if we do have a sequel, it will be called NewCity 2000. So this game is focused on a specific time period. It's focused on 1950 to 2000. So NewCity 2000 would, go into the 21st century. So it would include internet. And maybe we'll go into the past a little bit too, like the 19th century.
I'd be into that. And then maybe a little NewCity 3000 Unlimited, maybe some archaeologies and.
I in my life, I don't think that I can. One city builder was a alien task.
Monumental.
It's just inconceivable.
We've got this engine now, and so we're like, we've spent so much company time, and it's an asset. And so I think, NewCity 2000, whether it's a sequel, whether it's an expansion pack, then the question becomes, what's our next game? If we want to keep this company rolling. And so, I don't know, real.
And so we want like long term, we want to turn the engine into a platform.
Love it.
Other kind of city builder like games can be built. So that's what allows the possibility of going into the 21st century, going into the 19th century, and so on.
That's really awesome. I had never thought of that. The fact that you aren't necessarily, you're obviously designing a game, but it's also a proof of concept, and it's also a platform, like an engine.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to point out that city builders share a lot of mechanics with real-time strategy games.
Oh, going after that Total War, maybe.
One of our dream target goals is like NewCity should be moddable enough. And to be clear, this is not a promise. This is just like a dream goal. But like, I think that NewCity should be moddable enough that you can make a real-time strategy game.
I love that. That would be
within
sweet.
It, yeah.
That's great. Okay. Well, let's move out of challenges then, and let's move into, because you've already been talking about like what's upcoming, the dreams of what's upcoming. But can you share with us a little bit of what is definitely upcoming, or something that you are hoping to implement in this game in the next little while? Like what do we have to look forward to?
And before we get into that, I just want to emphasize, because we're a 3-person team, and so there are limits to what we can do.
Of course.
And there's kind of limits to my stamina as a human being.
You got to eat.
Right.
Yeah. Sleep, maybe.
Yeah.
Like we've been over all of the dreams that people have had for this game, and there's been a lot of suggestions and a lot of different ideas, and so we have like design documents and different things. I consider the promises to this game to be the features that we already have, the features, the things that we promised to our Indiegogo contributors. So we promised that they'd get like individualized statues and stuff like that. And more modability.
Right.
So I see those as the promises. So I think that we've really kind of fulfilled almost all of the promises already. There's still more work to do, and we're still working on it. We're going to be working on it for a while. And there's a lot of features that we're, trying to implement. We have, like a list of these branded updates. So we have like a plan. Mitch was saying that, on our schedule, that the economic update is going to be, what'd you say, October and November?
So yeah, economic update looks like it'll be launching at the end of October.
Great. And then is that more drill downs on the economy functions, or is that what's going on there?
It's going to be like a recession system. So there'll be, our slogan is going to be, because another thing that we don't have in addition to utilities is disasters.
Right.
And I could go into the reason why we don't have disasters, but, our slogan is going to be, once we have the recession system kind of all built out, is we only have one type of disaster. It's called an economic recession, and it's more devastating than any fire or flood.
And way more devastating to a player, because I think people love just throwing meteors at their city and then just going back a couple of save games, but because they know they're printing money already. They've already like maxed out so with NewCity, that's crazy. That was one thing I noticed when I was playing the game. I built out my university, and then I was like, why are my finances in the toilet? I was like, oh yeah, this university is expensive to maintain. I need a way bigger city before I have a big university.
And this is one of my design goals as a game designer is, most of these games, simulation type games, they become less challenging in the late game because a big city or like a big factory in terms of Victoria, or a big whatever, in terms of whatever you're simulating, it's always prints money or prints whatever the base resources are. And so the game doesn't have any way to give any new challenges to the player at that point.
I love that. I love this idea of an economic recession. I mean, I don't, obviously, because it will probably bankrupt me. But like, I'm very excited for what that's going to do to the genre too. That idea that it gets harder.
That's something that, from a game design perspective, is interesting, because if you have disasters enabled in your SimCity 3000 city, you'll be playing the game and you'll be having a good time, and then there's an earthquake and you lose 3 city blocks, and there was nothing the player could do. It's just like, it's the equivalent of coming in and kicking over your sandcastle and saying, okay, now deal with it. From a game design perspective, that's, and we've learned a lot since the 90s. The player, anytime you introduce a challenge or an obstacle to the player, they should have a way to respond and a way to mitigate it through their skilled manipulation of the sandbox. We have, say, sector-based recessions. If you build your city heavy in industry, and then, industry is having a rough year, what do? Well, you build out your agriculture. Hopefully, if you're a smart city designer, you've already had agriculture, or you lean into your retail. Maybe you have to raise sales tax for a time. But giving the player these tools to respond to a disaster, such that it's not kicking over your sandcastle. You can actually fight back a little bit. It makes for a more interesting game and more drama, if you will.
That is so well said. So is that what some of the tools are going to be? Like, you're raising your sales tax, you're building out other industries. What are other ways with the economic update that we can fight back against the poverty?
Well, Lone Pine, do you have because I know those are the ones we've discussed. You have control over your taxes. You can build out your different industry sectors. What would you suggest would be some tools?
So this is a little bit of economic geekery for me. There's multiple schools of economics, and some more conservative economists would say that the government really shouldn't do anything about recessions, that it's just a natural process that has to happen. But more, let's say, liberal economics and kind of the mainstream economics would say that in a recession, the government should do counter-cyclical economic activities, such as counter-cyclical spending. And what that means is, the government is taking something out of the economy by taxing, and then it's putting something back into the economy with welfare or military spending or scientific spending. So in a recession, the government should put more into the economy and take less out in terms of taxes. And so that would presumably mean going into debt or inflating the currency, printing more money. As a city manager, you don't have the ability to print more money. You're not a central bank.
Yeah.
You do have the ability to go into debt. This is something we've noticed that players are very reluctant to go into debt. The game is actually designed that you're kind of supposed to go into debt.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your line of credit.
Yeah, so we're trying to figure out how can we make the text in the game make the players feel more comfortable about that, because I think it's kind of a fear thing, that players assume that there's going to be some sort of consequence if they go too much into debt. So for example, in the game SimCity 2000, I think it was if you got negative $150,000, then you literally got a game over screen.
You're voted out.
Right, the game said that you were pushed out of office. There's no game over screen. There actually just isn't a game over screen. You stop playing when you lose.
It's irreparable.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So it's just a never-ending hole you've built yourself into or something.
Right. Yep. Right. But there's a lot of ways out of a bad budget situation. So there really isn't a lot that's irreparable, because you can suspend all spending. Mm-hmm. And you can sell all of your buildings to get, you can sell them. So you get.
Yeah. I noticed that recently when I was trying to figure out what was going on with my finances, my first round of playing the game. And then I was like, oh yeah, my line of credit increases the more assets I build. The more stuff I have, the more debt I have access to.
Collateral.
Right, because the bank thinks that you have this asset that you could sell in a crisis.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And to two last points, like Lone Pine said, finding ways to allow the savvy player who saved up a chunk of change for them to leverage their money as a resource to coast their city through. Yeah, like you were saying, putting spending back. Well, that's a mechanic we'll look into. And then you can also shut down amenities. So if you've got your schools all built out, whatnot, the recession hits, you're like, we're just not making budget, you can shut everything down for a year. Of course, the heat maps will suffer, prosperity will suffer, growth will suffer,
community dissolves.
Yeah, but that's the choice you have to make as the mayor.
I imagine you have some people moving out as well, maybe. I guess the density would pull back if people are like, well, what's the point of living in this town? Is that
so? That's the difference between easy mode and hard mode.
Oh, okay.
Easy mode, people don't move out and businesses don't close. In hard mode, businesses can close and people can move out, so your city can actually shrink. And particularly in a recession, I think that almost every city, no matter how well you're defended, that there should be some negative growth.
Of course, yeah. See some areas get hollowed out, and oh man,
yep,
that makes for some stark but very cool screenshots too of just
awesome.
Yeah, the cautionary
urban
tales.
decay.
I've already experimented with it. So there's, some trailers that show what a city would look like in a recession. Like all the cities are brown, or all the buildings are brown, and the streets are empty. There's no cars on the road. That particular city, I really destroyed it. It was irreparable. I have the kind of the basis of the recession system, and so I pushed it so far that the city was a third its size.
Oh my god!
There were no cars on the road. All the buildings were abandoned. It was nuts.
Well, that's one way to deal with traffic problems, I guess. Just hollow the city out. I think that we don't want to keep going for too much longer. I could, but I feel like listening to a 6-hour YouTube video might be a bit tough for some people.
Of course.
So I kind of wanted to wrap it up a little bit on, first of all, thank you so much for making another city builder. I need as many of these as I can get, and this is a very strong one, so it's a lot of fun. A lot of the comments on my video have been very positive. They're just like, whoa, this game looks awesome. This game looks awesome. Providing me with tips. And I think you know a game is good when you see people in YouTube comments being like, actually, what you should have done was this. And then somebody's
Yes.
like, I don't know, because actually you could have done this, you know? So
Is
that's
that
awesome to see.
Cunningham's law?
Yeah.
Cunningham's law states that the best way to get the right answer on the internet is not to ask a question, it's to post the wrong answer.
Exactly. So that's what I do. I post very amateur gameplay, and then I get all the tips I need. But I guess my last question for you was going to be, well, actually, and I kind of do want to know what else is coming up. We've got the economic update, but I was also going to ask maybe this is
a big question. We're still having fun, so just one more big question.
Yeah.
I love that. This is a selfish question. This is just for me. I need some tips. So if you have any good new city tips, I am ready to hear them. I'm trying to get my highway in right now, and I built sort of like a basic on and off ramp onto the highway. But
Right.
what are some tips for implementing transit? What are some tips that you want to give players that maybe you haven't seen players doing too much, and you're like, come on, guys, it's right there.
Yeah, so I'll give you one comment is there's a bug in the game. This drives me nuts.
Oh, no.
And I've seen this in other games. I almost built this game to fix this bug, and I still haven't been able to fix it.
Oh,
It's
no, what is this?
algorithms where if you have a highway off ramp and an intersection and then an on ramp, from that intersection back onto the highway, that sometimes cars will prefer to go off ramp,
Right.
intersection, on ramp,
And then back onto
staying on the highway, and trying to figure out don't do that. That's stupid.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. It destroys the traffic. So the trick, to prevent that from happening right now is you build a square roundabout using one-way roads. You can use expressways too, and have the off-ramp go onto the square roundabout and have a segment of road before the on-ramp.
Right.
Yeah.
right. Okay.
And then they won't do that. I don't know why that makes the difference, but that makes the difference somehow. Yeah, and
Fascinating.
definitely learn how to use the tools. I know that they can be a bit intimidating, and we're doing our best to try to provide more explanations. There's been some community content in terms of videos and wikis and whatnot. I think that definitely learning how to use mass transit and use all the road building tools. Mitch, what would you say on that topic?
Well, first, just to speak to what you were saying about learning the tools, I think, and you want to know about near future updates. The closest update is going to be the Read All About It update, and we're going to implement better in-game documentation. We'll have the Civipedia from Civilization.
Love it.
We're gonna have the Citipedia. So we'll, I'll go in there and write some articles, helping, because we'll still have players we have zone brushes where you can basically do a paintbrush and paint the zones.
Yeah.
But I still have players saying, hey, I can only put zones along the edge of a road. I'd really like a way to paint it. And it's it's already in game. But we don't communicate it well.
Okay.
So we're going to do better tutorials. We're going to do the Citipedia. We're going to do add a newspaper to give you more feedback on the state of your city. But then in terms of what tips I would offer, in terms of the early game, and me coming from SimCity, I feel like a lot of other players are too, you need less retail than you think, and you need more agriculture. And it's deceptive because agriculture just blows up in terms of size. And you think, I have a city that's 70% agriculture in terms of square footage. That's about right. And you might even need more, especially early game when they're trying to get jobs and you're trying to get your city started. So don't worry about, because each retail building can house multiple businesses, and every business can have, can serve a wide number of customers.
Right.
And retail densifies the first, and as it densifies, it gets more businesses per building.
Right. Yeah. So you even need less. That's something I for sure noticed coming from SimCity or City Skylines. I was like, I built a fraction of the factories I thought I would, and almost no retail compared to like city skylines. And then yeah,
Right.
the agriculture, but that makes sense. That's what goes to what Lone Pine was saying, is like if you take a flight and you look out the window, cities, and then the rest is farm.
Exactly.
We got to
And
make
so
food.
especially early game. And then, once you get density and once you can transition to industry and offices, you could theoretically bulldoze some of your farms and kind of shift over that direction. But I see players have a hesitance, like, well, I already have so many farms. Yeah, you probably need more. I already, why is my retail building? Well, because you already have some retail and it's serving all these customers. Things like mixed use and industry and offices requiring density to start. Well, why isn't my mixed use developing? Well, your city hasn't built to the point where it needs those sorts of apartments over
Right.
shops,
Here's another selfish add on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lone Pine.
Yeah, build your expressway at about 50,000. Because if you went like 100,000, then it's going to be too expensive. You're going to have to tear up your city.
This is my knock-on question. That's again even more selfish now. I laid down a nice like central park kind of thing, like a big open space in the middle, and I designated parkland all around it. And I haven't seen anything grow there. And
you won't.
And I won't. And is that a size or a density thing?
No. It is open space. And
okay.
This is a communication issue that we haven't communicated to the players that, the park lots, they don't spawn buildings.
Okay.
They're open space, but each individual like lot tile that you see, the little, square that you see, that provides a benefit.
Okay.
Anti-pollution, and it provides value.
I think community too, right?
I'm not sure.
Dig in.
Look, and we should state that actually in the game, like you get this benefit for this,
right?
Equivalent to like a +1 in an amenity,
right?
You also pay per lot. So
whoops.
Parks and Recreation budget. Part of that budget is the lots.
So having an expansive hole in the middle of my city isn't so much useful as maybe having smaller chunks throughout.
I mean,
you can densify, and like part of that's an aesthetic choice, but you can kind of intensify the park, like a more intensive park. You almost build it like a residential neighborhood where you build roads everywhere and you put park lots everywhere.
I love that. Okay, that's good to know.
Think about like Central Park in New York, because it's just like a big open space preserve, right?
Yeah.
In terms of city planning, what could have been revenue generating skyscrapers, the trade-off is there's this big open hole in the middle of New York, but it provides benefits to the environment, in our case, reducing pollution, increasing value. When we get our pedestrian simulation, we're going to do some work on that. And so your pedestrians you can do walking paths through the park. Yep. And we're also going to add more decorations, so you'll be able to like manually plant trees, which also will eventually have an impact. So
very looking forward to that. Okay, so I'm keeping my Central Park there because then eventually I'll connect to some roads through it. I already added like a natural history museum in there, I think, was one of the amenities I unlocked recently. Yeah. So, and that is kind of what happened to Central Park too. There's like, I think there's like a bunch of little things inside of it, like other businesses. Like,
I think
isn't
so.
It like a zoo? I don't really know New York actually.
Central Park Zoo. Let's find out.
Fact check me live.
Central Park, from a strategic perspective, is probably suboptimal. Just because it's a big park, whereas I think it will be more optimal to have smaller parks distributed.
Yeah. And I think even aesthetically, like you said, it's an aesthetic choice. So I could probably pull that off, but I might as well also spread out parks throughout the city. And this is what's making me realize my city is very parkless. It just has one big mega park. So that's a very good thing to know.
There is a Central Park Zoo.
There we go.
Fascinating. And a museum of natural history.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff in the park. It's just not a lot of skyscrapers. Now, did I get everything?
I end up putting some of my bigger amenities like the zoo and the stadium in those big central parks, just because that's where I have the open space.
Yeah, and if you plan ahead of time, if you keep a space open in the center of your city, you're going to want to put something awesome there. That's great. I think I have asked most of my core questions. I think that there's enough content here for like 65 more interviews. So you know what? Like every content update, hit me up on Discord. Like, let's do this. Let's keep this going. But
will do.
I loved getting to know about some of the challenges, and I think my favorite story was that bug that you've been trying to chase out of city builders and now have found in yours. So best of luck with that friggin' bug.
Man, it's fun.
You
It's never not fun.
know what the hard problem is going into a big project like this.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know that routing was going to be the hard problem.
Right. And now I guess you do.
Now I do.
Yeah,
And
boy, do we ever.
Literally, like when I go into the profiler, like the CPU time that the game takes, it's like 90% is spent on the routing.
Wow.
Now that's all in other threads, so that's not actually slowing down the game. That's not like a frame rate issue, but it does take up a lot of CPU time.
Sounds like it. Wow. Okay. I mean, yeah, it must be tough to be a creative designer who has sort of an artistic or like a fun, like a gameplay vision, but then you also need to just be like a nuts and bolts engineer. Like at the end of the day, you just have to be an engineer.
Well, I mean, engineering is kind of art within constraints.
Yeah. And that's game design is fundamentally the intersection of like science and art. It's the intersection of, the computer science and engineering that goes into solving these problems. And then how do you present those solutions in a way that's fun or visually interesting,
That's awesome. And you've done that with NewCity. And I am so excited to keep playing the new updates. I'm excited to see what's coming up. I'm excited to see that community grow, both in the game and in real life.
We love your enthusiasm.
Hey, thanks.
It warms our hearts, really. It does. It's so encouraging.
Fans.
Well, I'm glad to encourage a little bit, and I'm going to get some more of these NewCity videos going on. I'm having a blast.
Awesome.
I got to do it. So, oh, sorry. Were you going to say one last sweet tip or a secret?
I was just going to say solid content. Thank you so much for having us. This has been a great time, and I look forward to seeing your NewCity videos.
Hey, well, thanks so much. That's a nice thing to say. Yeah, no, it was a blast to get to interview you guys, and I hope everyone listening had a blast in the interview as well, and I will see you all in the next episode of Solid Content.
Yeah.
Cheers.